To the actions of Colin MacLeod, the Birdman of Pollock, who taught us what direct action can do through a stunningly good anti-motorway campaign against the M77, which led to the setting up of the enterprise which is GalGael. Another debt of our group has to Govan itself is in the person of our artist activist Govan girl Stacey Rice, a graduate of the Glasgow School of Art, who made her banner featuring action on a landscape on Glasgow Green. The banner is large, has a traditional system of interlocking carrying poles, and is the best banner on every demonstration we've been to in the last 3 years. When we took it to the Scottish Parliament last year with the Glasgow Against Closures demonstration, every speaker in the demo stood in front of it to give their account. Stacey Rice also made a giant yellow protest banner 1.5 metres deep and long enough to go right round the People's Palace and Winter Gardens, with pictures and text on the history of the building and the action our group has taken to make sure it will stay open. You'll see some of the images in the middle of last month's Keeley. We've left some of these on the table here. The yellow banner was made for COP26 demonstration on Glasgow Green last year, and we also used it for the 124th People's Palace birthday party on the Green. And if you want to see it for yourself, it will be out for May Day on Sunday the 1st of May on Glasgow Green again. The Friends of the People's Palace Winter Gardens in Glasgow Green in its present form has been at work since December 2018, when the Winter Gardens were shut as dangerous, and the People's Palace Museum, which depended on its interlinking services, the escape, the fire escape, the lift, the cafe and the toilets, also had to close because that was shut. It just so happened that Glasgow Life, when booking tourist advertising for 2019, had removed the People's Palace from its list of museums, expecting just to quietly close it and repurpose it. When we challenged their negative intentions towards the building, they vehemently denied it, saying that the withdrawal of advertising had just been a mistake, a clerical error. They even tried to blame it on the advertising agency Landmark Press of Carbridge, who are a very professional outfit, who in turn made it very clear to us there had been no mistake at all. Councillor David Macdonald, Deputy Leader of the Council and Chair of Glasgow Life, who run Glasgow Museums, that's the arm's length external organisation which run the museums, took it upon himself to find funding to get Alice opened, while Susan Aiken, the council leader, assured us that the plants in the Winter Gardens would be watered and otherwise cared for until the structure was put to rights. To a great fanfare in Easter 2019, it was announced that £350,000 had been spent on getting the People's Palace reopened. The £350,000 was spent in erecting a 2.5 metre high security fence around the Winter Gardens, the kind of council fence of no confidence that they put round a building to secure it for demolition. And they built a tunnel into the Winter Gardens to access the toilets and the fire escape from the museum. And inside the Winter Gardens they spent money in blocking up every museum window, every view into the gardens, in case anyone should see the gardens at all. And from the outside they've painted the glass to about 3 metres high with white paint in case you could see anything. So they spent all this money blocking up what they were going to do. In the museum, a coffee point with a few chairs and tables installed in the ground floor gallery along with the shop came to apparently £350,000, which didn't actually stretch to even washing the floors, which were as dirty as the day they closed them. Now, there had been a lot of talk about the council shedding the winter gardens. When the last concert was held there in 2018, the heating had been switched off and the cafe closed. Those performing were well wrapped up in jumpers and had brought flasks of tea with them. Some months later, the next negative sign we saw after the Easter opening was that a firm had been given permission to come and help themselves to any plants they wanted from the winter gardens, and they'd come all the way from Bradford to do that, and they were able to do this free of charge. Then some months after that, a company were filmed on site with wood chippers having cut the palm trees down inside the gardens and shredded them all on site. And this was followed up by a scrap merchant breaking all of the cafe furniture up outside the building and tossing it onto a lorry for going to the scrap heap. Even though we knew things were bad, the release of a photo by a whistleblower on the eve of COP26 caused a sensation and was published multiple times in newspapers and online, and showed the devastation extended to the lifting of all the expensive flooring, the removal of the cafe servery, the removal of the kitchen, and the destruction of everything. And the reason for this that was given was it had to be stripped out to allow for a proper estimation of the renewal work required. Now, this is something we've found very hard to believe. The building had stood for 124 years. Plants were never taken out when the glass house needed repaired. Furthermore, the problem is allegedly with the glass, and not with the plants, and not with the furniture, and not with the flooring. And they've still got it listed as dangerous, and in inclement weather they even shut down the garden outside of the winter garden, so in case the whole structure blows away and hurts somebody. I'm pleased to say that after 3 years closure there isn't a single cracked or missing pane of glass in the winter gardens. And this is in sharp contrast with the many other broken down glass houses in the city like Tollcross, Queen's Park and Springburn Winter Gardens, which hasn't had a pane of glass in it since the mid-1980s. We now believe that the whole People's Palace complex has been in managed decline and ready for closure since 2011. The People's Palace, to let you understand, was done on its centenary in 1998. And the displays and presentation have had no investment, no changes, no upgrade, no anything since, and it's just been decline. Over the last 3 years, the council have made various pledges and promises and let us down various garden paths, offering public consultation through organisations like the Democratic Society, which failed to deliver anything except an invoice. Although we were promised by Councillor Macdonald that we should never need to go to the freedom of information process to find stuff out, as he would tell us everything himself, we don't know what the size of that invoice was, and we've asked many times. We do know, however, that Councillor Macdonald, who leaves the council at the May elections, is now employed as representative in Scotland for the Democratic Society. And there's a whole bit on the website telling us what he thinks about democracy and how it gives a voice to people, but he certainly knew how to silence our voices in his time in office by stringing us along with the various untruths. Now, as an action group, our mission is to care, renew and advocate for the People's Palace Winter Gardens in Glasgow Green. We aim to preserve and enhance the park and its key assets. We see this as a function of Glasgow City Council, and we have no intention of volunteering to do the work of paid staff. And we're in existence as a support group, and we want to see the council start giving as much attention to the history and culture of the city of Glasgow and its constituent parks, present lavishing on the Borough Collection, now due to open in Pollock Park on the 29th of March. Now, I can see you thinking, why should we be caring about the People's Palace and Winter Gardens? It's on the other side of the town, the opposite side of the river, and here in Govan, our history, built environment, communities and industries have been laid to waste as much as any other part of Glasgow. Govan has been disadvantaged by its relationship with Glasgow for at least 1,000 years. This is very true. You could almost say that the last decent director of Glasgow museums was TCF Brocce, who began his working life in the Govan Press in the Councillor building. He wrote many books on Scottish history and a very decent book on the history of Govan. I hope some of you have got it. And was superintendent, which is another word for director, of Glasgow Art Galleries in 1919 to 1930. This was the last time that Glasgow history had fair treatment in Glasgow museums. Director Tom Honeyman arrived in 1939 and worked to 54. That was the time the Borough collection came, and also the Scott collection of arms and armour, which saw the Glasgow collection moved out of Kelvin Grove and away to the People's Palace to make way for it. Culture which was valued was culture that had been purchased from elsewhere by these oligarchs, Borough and Scott. Both of them were shipbuilders who did not value in any way the culture of those who actually built the ships for them. In past times, I worked as a curator at People's Palace, and from the start was told in no uncertain terms how Glasgow's material culture meant little to those in charge. I also knew that the material culture of Govan had been othered even more, because every Govanite I met kept telling me so. One of the first things I learned was that the award-winning Strathclyde Police Pipe Band was actually the Govan Police Pipe Band, where the Strathclyde Band subsumed all of the great Govan pipers in the same way as Glasgow had the Borough of Govan in 1912, without recognition and without due credit, and that was still in the 70s. It was the Govan Pipe Band. Now, I'd like to share with you some information about Govan items in the People's Palace, and hope that you might be inspired to help and join with our group. The pre-Christian and Christian settlements at Govan predates those of Glasgow by centuries, and as Brocce pointed out, if the Synod of Whitby in AD 664 had gone the other way, Glasgow might have become the suburb of Govan. We might have been talking about the city of Govan now. As the People's Palace had a remit to tell the history of all of Glasgow, I tried to make sure that the displays and the collections reflected all of this, and that there was a good amount of Govan stuff there. The start of the early Glasgow Gallery had a reconstructed gable of an early Govan church with a tiny stained glass window which we'd rescued from St Kenneth's in Govan, but which looked early enough to be right, with a cast of one of the Govan hogback stones and a large dugout canoe salvaged from the Clyde at Govan. One of the best set of lantern slides we had in the People's Palace was that on the development of Govan, and the images show the charms of Waterloo before it was obliterated by Harland and Wolff, and the exceptionally well-built environment, including the Govan Press building, Govan Town Hall and the Pearce Institute. The radicalism of Govan was always an inspiration from Mary Barber onwards, and Govan was the only place I knew that had a statue of a real woman as opposed to a queen, and that's of Isabella Elder, who not only founded and funded Elder Park and the library, she insisted that the library be open on a Sunday. This was truly radical at the time, because activists were then having to fight Sabbatarian societies to get all the other museums open. And there was Isabella Elder saying, no Sunday open and no library, and she got it. Then you have Mary Barber, who not only led the rent strike, she led the Women's Peace Crusade, and I could see her clipping the ears of any young Glasgow men who think they're going off to fight Russia right now. You know, she was very much for peace. Among the portraits we have in the People's Palace, as you've seen in the film, was one of the Red Clydesider, Harry McShane, who was a proud engineer and in many ways embodied the spirit of revolt. He was an expert organiser, and when needing publicity for an important meeting here in Govan, he procured a coffin from the co-op. With some of his fellow shipyard workers, he bolted the coffin and the coffin led to one of the railway bridges with a wee coil. It's not very often I leave my coffin, but I'm making the exception today. Wall Hannington speaks in Govan Town Hall. How the hell can I stay away? The shipyard rivets with which the coffin and the lid was put up defeated the efforts of the police to get it down. I'd like to also say that the People's Palace was the first museum in Glasgow to collect Dockers hooks. The Transport Museum thought that it wasn't worth the effort, you know. But Dockers hooks were one of the most frequently pawned items in hard times in the past. Without the hook for grabbing the canvas bags and slinging them and managing them, the dockers couldn't work, and the pawnbroker always knew that they'd come back and redeem. The portrait of Jimmy Reid by Alistair Gray, although painted in Clydebank, is another Govan-related work. Alistair, as you saw in the film, also painted Margot Macdonald in the clothes she wore while campaigning for the Govan by-election in 1973, and each of Alistair's subjects got to choose their own background, and Margot chose Govan Cross and the statue of Sir William Pearce, who lived from 1833 to 1888. He was the head of Fairfield Shipping and Engineering and also her predecessor as a Govan MP. Margot was a national figure for a long time, and it's a pity the Scottish National Portrait Gallery never bothered to commission a picture of her. However, when she died, the portrait of her by Alistair was still her screensaver on her computer. But Margot's choice of the Pearce statue or the Black Man was a good one, but he was one of the genuine philanthropists in Glasgow. It was he, when the university up sticks and moved from the High Street in the middle of Glasgow to Gilmour Hill in the West End, funded the removal of the medieval buildings of the university stone by stone and had them reconstructed in what is known as the Pearce Lodge at the foot of University Avenue. That's actually in the middle of the medieval university. They also moved the Lion and Unicorn staircase, which is elsewhere reconstructed in the university. Now here's an amazing thing. It was William Pearce, although he'd been dead for 142 years, actually won the Scottish Home of the Year award in 2020. I don't know if you know that. His decorator was Andrew Wells, and his stained glass artist was Stephen Adam for his mansion house at 3 Park Terrace. The man who stood there taking the prize for Scottish Home of the Year 2020 failed to mention that the interiors were done for Sir William Pearce, and the judges failed to notice that the marine themed stained glass scheme in the building was totally to Pearce's requirements. Just Google hashtag Shotty 2020 Scottish Home of the Year and have a wee look for yourself. But there you are, dead 142 years, and he wins Scottish Home of the Year. What a man. Now, two of the most treasured objects in the People's Palace are the banner of the Govan Weavers Society and the 1756 security box in which it was kept. There's also a collection of related weaving artefacts. For one exhibition we actually borrowed the sheep's head, which heads the annual Govan Fair the first Saturday of June, and it's good to see this tradition is maintained still in the area after 2 centuries of the weaving trade not being here. Now, as a curator, I was always in competition with more powerful interests when trying to collect. When the CWS in Manchester took over the Scottish Cooperative Wholesale Society in 1975 and shut it down, most of the interesting items in their historic collection went straight to Manchester, where the Rochdale pioneers allegedly invented cooperation in 1844. However, there was a co-op society run by weavers in Fenwick from 1769, another by the weavers of Govan in 1777, and in Bridgeton from 1800. Co-op societies were a massive part of people's lives, with co-op factories making and supplying everything from cradle to grave. Around Christmas 1976, when the SCWS boot and shoe factory along the road here in Shield Hall was being emptied, we got an urgent call to bring a van before the material was going to get skipped. And what we got were a giant pair of boots and a giant pair of shoes, scaled up to size 36, made at Shield Hall for the 1938 Empire exhibition. These are works of beauty and craftsmanship, showing the best of what the co-op was capable of. Sadly, they're now in what is called a children's gallery at Kelvin Grove, with nothing about their history, their manufacturing community of Shield Hall or the SCWS. They're totally ripped out of context. Oh, here's a big pair of shoes and boots and no story. The saddest items ever collected from Govan were the remnants of the collection of Dr. Barris, the medical officer of health for Govan, whose practice was in Govan Road. I think he was a bit like Dr. John Kirk, the founder of the fabulous York Castle Museum, who collected objects from his patients in lieu of payments. This is back in the 19th century. Unfortunately, the collection had been with libraries here in Govan, and they kept it in a basement which had flooded on more than one occasion. And I got what was left of it in 2 plastic bags, and sadly there wasn't very much. I don't recall collecting tenement tiles here, but just along the road in Kinning Park there were public halls, and everywhere in Glasgow the public halls were being emptied of their tiles and fitted with replacement wood panelling, which looked very like plastic, and you'll see some of this nice plastic from the 70s there. However, Glasgow District Council Direct Works Department cut us a big section of tiles and framed it for us from the Kinning Park Halls. Perhaps the biggest item collected from Govan was the great Oculus window from St Kenneth's Church prior to demolition. The window is by Norman MacLeod McDougall, who worked chief glass painter and designer for Daniel Cottier in the 1880s and 90s. It's a significant work by a major Scottish stained glass artist, which has never been on show. If you want to see it, it's featured in the science fiction horror movie Death Watch, starring Harvey Keitel and also Robbie Coltrane. That was his first film, I think. And there's a glorious moment in the film where the camera pans from the darkness upwards to the great circle of beautiful stained glass. Now, the artist Norman MacLeod McDougall was actually Sir William Burroughs' advisor on the acquisition and purchase of medieval stained glass from Europe for his collection. Burrough was no connoisseur, he was no William Pierce. He purchased on the advice of many other experts. So when you go along to see the Burrough Museum, remember all the Glasgow and Govan material and treasure which is locked up by Glasgow Museum for decades, and join us in demanding that the history and culture of Glasgow in all of its parts be given as much attention as the borough is now getting. And I think it's high time. Thank you very much for listening.